afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thanks for participating in kind of our little poll here to see where some of you were from today. It looks like we've got kind of a broad swath across Montana. Looks like we have no out-of-staters with us, or at least no out-of-staters that are participating in the poll here today. So first of all, thank you all for joining us. I work for Montana State University Extension, and obviously the health impacts of the coronavirus have been pretty widespread, but some of sort of the treatments or prevention measures to limit that have a pretty large economic impact. So we decided to kind of put together some different economists to visit about some of the different aspects of this, specifically here in Montana, some things we know, some things we would like to know, some things we're hoping to know, and maybe we can share a little bit of those resources with you all today. First of all, we did schedule 4 weeks of this, and it's going to be Thursdays at 2 o'clock next week. We're going to have Norman Nickerson from the University of Montana Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research visit a little bit with us about some tourism impacts. We're going to have Tino Sonora from the University of Montana Bureau of Business and Economic Research join us, and I believe he's going to talk about some healthcare issues. And then Kate Fuller is going to join us from MSU Extension, and she's going to talk something about some ag impacts, and we'll get some more final titles sorted out for those three before April 9th. We've got some ideas for April 16th, but things are evolving kind of quickly, so we'll probably not announce what those are going to be until just prior to maybe the April 9th session, so you'll always know a week in advance. We did create a website where we're going to put the recording for today's session. It's on the screen there as well. It didn't make it into that initial flyer. We'll also post our schedule there as well. I will try to post that into the question and answer pod there at the bottom later on as the presentation goes along. But if you want to, you can certainly grab that and bookmark it, but I will put it into the question and answer pod. Second thing about interacting with us today, the question and answer pods will come only to the presenters today. So send them in, they'll be anonymous. If we get a question in, I'll just interrupt the speaker when we get a chance, and we'll say, you know, we've got a question come in, could you address this? So please feel free to send in whatever questions you would like. So with that, I think that's enough housekeeping notes for today. Let me introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is going to be Patrick Barkey. He's the director of the Bureau of Business and Economic Research over at the University of Montana. Many of you probably know him from some of the reports they've put out about the status of the economy in Montana over many years, and for the roadshow tour they do to get around the state and share some of that information with everyone across the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat here for a while.
Thank you, Joel, and good afternoon, everybody. Does this sound okay, Joel? Are people hearing me okay?
Yep, we can hear you just fine. Thanks, Pat.
It's kind of an inside joke why I need to test that. I'm a little well known for plunging into these things with my microphone muted. Well, it's a privilege to talk to you all. It's interesting that I'm going first on this program, which is actually going to go all month, because the way this whole situation is unraveling, whatever I say is likely to not be relevant next week or nor the week after. It's moving just that quickly. I want to talk about what some of the economic implications are for the virus. I talk a little bit about Montana. I want to start by just saying how different today is than just a month ago. A month ago, we were still touring the state doing an economic outlook event. And the question being asked, as we asked every year, was, is the economic expansion coming to an end? And the answer we were saying a month ago is that, well, really nobody knows. I mean, after all, it is the future, but probably not. And that is hugely changed. I mean, it's now clearly coming to an end. But I thought I would share with you some of the reasons, some of the things that were going right for the economy before the COVID thing exploded in our faces. Consumer spending was very strong. We had an uptick in home building, particularly in Bozeman and western Montana. The inversion of interest rates had ended. It looked like the global economy was picking up. And what we were worried about before the virus hit, we were worried about manufacturing because it was looking weak. It was weak mostly because the global environment was fragile, and that was mostly because of trade. So the two things we worried about before COVID were the trade wars with China and, of course, the election. And that has mammothly changed. What we see now, right now, is a recession unfolding in front of us, and it's in some ways it's not a surprise because all growth always comes to an end. There's always a recession, and the fact that the recession itself comes from a surprising source is not a surprise, because that's how recessions happen. If we could predict why they were going to occur, we could head them off. So it's always that body blow you didn't expect when you weren't looking, etc., that's caused this. And of course, that right now is something which in economics jargon we call a shock to the system. And that, of course, is the virus outbreak, which started in Asia, started in China, as we know. And it started with a real shutdown of normal life in Wuhan and eventually to the rest of China. And we all know now personally up close in Montana what that shutdown entails because we're living it right now. But in January, that shut down normal life in China, shut down their manufacturing sector, gigantic changes. The manufacturing footprint of China changed so much that their air pollution actually cleared up. And that was the first stage. And that really has done three things to the U.S. economy and the Montana economy, and for that matter, the global economy. The first thing it did is it disrupted the supply side of the economy. So the goods and services being produced, it was a huge disruption. All the output from not all, but a huge change in output from Asian facilities. Those go into all kinds of supply chains in the US and elsewhere. All the people that sold that stuff had an interruption in income. All the supply chains dependent on Asian supply were interrupted, and we know that for medical things. We know all kinds of things have been interrupted. That was the first shock, but simultaneous with that, there was also a demand shock, and the demand shock occurred as people lost money. And when people lose money, they don't buy as much stuff. And oh yes, by the way, there's also a big scare of contagion. So after initial stockpiling, we're seeing this certainly in the US, a gigantic cratering of demand for all kinds of goods and services, largely because of the uncertainty. Uncertainty as to infection, uncertainty as to anything in the future. People have shortened their time horizons. So that was another simultaneous shock. And yet there's also been a third one, and that, of course, is in the financial sector. And so much has changed in the financial sector right now. I mean, obviously the equities have plunged, bond markets have radically changed. All kinds of commodity prices have changed. So it's confidence, it's uncertainty, and eventually, as the price of all these assets plunges and our net worth goes down, that's affecting our spending. So these three things have gone into a recession of extraordinary speed and severity. What happens from this point basically depends on what we do. So several weeks ago, this is what we were saying, and it's still true today. And that is where the economy goes in the future largely depends on how well and how fast we react to it. We basically need two things. We need Congress to do something, and they have. They're going to need to do more. But there's a huge private sector financial storm happening. There's millions, literally millions of small and medium-sized businesses that have had huge hits to their revenue, and yet they still have obligations. So they're really in danger of being insolvent. And that's something we don't want to let happen because it's something that it is going to be really difficult to undo. So we need an increase in social safety net spending. And on the monetary side, we need to really open up the spigots in terms of allowing liquidity in the economy and allowing some extraordinary things to happen with respect to regulation. These things have mostly happened. I'm not going to dwell on this. Interest rates have changed enormously. They've gone way down. This graph is actually dated, one of my least interesting graphs, I have to admit, but it just shows you how much interest rates, even as of early this month, how much they fell as people were liquidating their assets in other in equities, and at this point going into bonds, and now they're really just going strictly into cash. So that's what we know. what's needed and what isn't? Well, again, I came up with this list, and this is a good chance to evaluate. So I put down some things I think that we needed to do, and there's check marks next to most of these things because we by and large done them. We need creative Fed action. When I say creative, we need the Federal Reserve to step in and do things quickly because it's administratively organized to do just that. And they have done that. They've done some extraordinary things to boost liquidity, boost lending, and take some innovative actions. Quick action to inject cash into households. The last bill signed by President Trump recently should do that. We need to get money to small and medium-sized businesses to help them weather the storm, help them hang on to their employees. We've done that. We need to have a tariff holiday. We haven't done that. We need to just suspend all this trade stuff, just so that's another problem we don't have a problem with. And yes, we will need to help select industries. What we don't need is we don't need what I call crony capitalism, which is rolling out your favorite project, be it an infrastructure bill, all kinds of slow-moving stuff that really just benefits large companies, doesn't really solve the problem, just uses the crisis as an excuse to do things. We really don't need that. We don't need to have permanent mandates on business. We're getting close to some of these things, as you know, and we really don't need to give money to a lot of people. So what have we done? We've given the money to a lot of people. That's not the worst problem we can do. But really, the needs will be great, and not everybody has them. So we need to think about how we can help some people more than others. So what do we do? As we look into the future, there's 3 questions we need to address. The first question is, okay, we're in a serious downturn. How serious is it? So how far are we going to fall? Is the first question we need to ask. It's hard to answer these questions right now because everything's moving so much. A second question is, how long is that downturn going to last? So are we going to be at the low point for weeks, months? What is it? And finally, what's the trajectory of us pulling out? Are we in a hole that's going to take us years to get out, or are we in a quick snapback? There's going to be a lot of bad economic news ahead describing that first situation, how far we're going to fall. We're going to fall a long ways. Consulting group estimates that if we do 3 months of shelter in place, that would suspend about 1/3 of all jobs in the economy. You might say destroy, but I'm going to say suspend 1/3 of all jobs in the economy. What is that? About 45 million jobs. That's a lot of jobs. We're going to see, and we're already starting to see, some really shocking news on unemployment. We'll soon get news on tax receipts, overall growth. All these economic measures are going to be really scary, unprecedented. Use whatever word you want. If you want to, some of the forecasts for GDP growth in the second quarter. Now, I want to tell you these are annualized. So, for example, the FTI forecast of a 23% decline in GDP in the second quarter, that's the quarter we just started, that really means about a 6% decline in the quarter itself. But if that were to continue for a full year, it would be a 23% decline. I state that because that's the nomenclature. That's the way quarterly growths are typically expressed here in the U.S. So these are some pretty scary pieces of news. The recovery path. What does the recovery path, what's it going to look like? It depends on many, many unknowns. I'll just spell out a couple of them. First, there's the whole biological side of this, if you will, which of course interrelates to with public policy as well. So how is the pandemic going to play out in the U.S.? Are we going to have something that's kind of a Korea style? I don't know about China. We don't trust their data. But is it going to be a 2 or 3 month disruption with a tailing off of infections and some return to normal life? Or are we going to see strong public health measures be challenged by a virus resurgence? Because we don't really know everything about this bug. And if the virus comes back in the fall, that's a different kind of scenario. Or finally, the worst case scenario is simply where our public health measures don't work at all. The virus rampages through our population until it runs out of hosts. That's an ugly thing to anticipate, but we really don't know the answer. And then what's going to be the economic recovery? Are we going to have something which is a prolonged contraction? In other words, are we going to have secondary and tertiary effects? So we clearly have businesses hurting today. Are those businesses is a wave of bankruptcies going to extend into previously unaffected businesses like insurance or even healthcare? Bankruptcies, possibly financial panic. all these kinds of very ugly things? Or are we going to have something in between? Are we going to have a muted recovery where the recovery takes place, but it takes a long time to come back, or the strong bounce back? So you have all, there's 9 possibilities right there, right? And the closer you get up into the upper right-hand corner, the better it is for the economy. But we honestly don't have a handle on which one of these scenarios is going to occur. When you look closer at Montana, you look at some specific industries. Some of the pronouncements are rather dire. You can see Oxford Economics is saying an 80% hit on tourism in March. That's quite believable. The good news for Montana, by the way, is that not too many people are coming to Montana in March. The peak season for us is in the summer, but people are making plans today. So even 25% reductions would be a pretty severe blow to a place like Montana. We're still looking at this, and I just have a couple slides left, by the way, Joel. We're still looking at this. We're right now in the process of putting together a report to try to assess our state's recovery prospects. And when we look at this, we are going to try to take the key industries in Montana, and that's all the industries, and try to score them by their vulnerability to this situation. And the kinds of things we're looking at are, first, the kinds of businesses that have, as you can see on the slide, the links with risky behavior, discretionary activities, so travel, tourism, entertainment, large gatherings, person-to-person contact. Businesses that depend on that are going to be especially vulnerable. But then there's also financial considerations. This is going to be a serious hit on cash. Those companies that have relatively a lot of cash relative to their earnings and they have minimal debt responsibilities are going to be less vulnerable. The opposite is true for those with little cash flow, and also from a point of view of leverage. So leverage in the sense that if you depend on growth simply to pay your bills, then you're going to be more vulnerable in the situation. So when you do this, there's a national firm, Oxford Economics, has tried to rank industries in terms of their vulnerability, and there's some surprising outcomes. Among the most vulnerable industries, the one I work for, educational services, you can read on this list. Some of these have a footprint in Montana, some don't. Even utilities are on this list because of their debt obligations, obviously cruises. We're not sure how relevant this is for Montana, so that's why we're doing our own work. But it's interesting to take a look at this. If you look at those that are least vulnerable, this is interesting as well. It's not surprising to see tech on there. Slightly more surprising to see refineries. That certainly has not been the talk, but oil prices are a separate issue. Construction could be doing pretty well because construction is something that is industry go forward, take advantage of low interest rates, and the pent-up demand for housing is not going to go away. So I was asked to cover the world, the U.S., and Montana in 15 minutes, and I didn't even have time to tell a joke, but that's probably just as well in this environment. I don't tell a joke. So let me stop there, and Joel, see if there's any questions, or turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, Pat. Yeah, I'll pause here for a minute. If you've got a question for Pat, please type it in that question and answer pod there at the bottom of the screen. All right, we do have a question. Why do you think educational services are most vulnerable?
Well, Oxford Economics thinks they're the most vulnerable. I think there's a couple reasons for that. They do bring people together in groups. At least that's the traditional model, and that's certainly something that's threatened. I think also they rank almost dead last in terms of free cash flow. Universities are not. I mean, there's a handful of universities with huge endowments, but most universities don't have a lot of cash. And when you have a loss of revenue and continued obligations to pay for everything, they're quite vulnerable.
All right, well, let's one more question here before we move on. Are there models for how vulnerable construction is? Is there an estimate of what kind of percentage decline that might be?
Not yet, not from us. I mean, there are a number of national companies coming out with lots of estimates on it. I think there's clearly I want to distinguish that this is an analysis of in the recovery. So as we emerge from this, what kind of industries are going to do better and which will struggle? right now, construction, of course, is a very labor-intensive industry, and it's been hammered by the stay-in-place regulations. So it's food service workers, construction, they're all big on the list of who's hurting right now. But I think coming out of it, their recovery path looks better than many other industries.
All right, and I'm going to break my rule here, and I said last question, but I'm going to ask you one more. How does construction wind up as least vulnerable industry while real estate is vulnerable?
Real estate includes property management, includes leasing activities. So real estate's a little broader. It's not just real estate agents. I think that's the big thing, and I think most of that has to do with the financial side of things. I mean, it's an assessment by Oxford Economics of how that industry fares in terms of available cash. It's typically a highly leveraged industry, so I think that makes it more vulnerable. Construction, on the other hand, is there's many smaller companies, so I think it's largely on the demand side in construction, and largely on the residential side of construction, not so much commercial.
All right, and then we did have one more. We might as well just get them all caught up. What's the definition of wholesale trade?
Well, wholesale trade is just that. I mean, wholesale trade is the brokers, the distributors. Now, mind you, you have to remember that with government data, companies are not classified. It's the activities of individual facilities. So a lot of what Amazon is a retailer, but a lot of what Amazon does is wholesale. So a lot of people are employed in the company of Amazon doing wholesale work, and that's as close as I can get off the top of my head. I would invite you to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and read the definition.
All right, well, thank you very much, Pat, for joining there. Let's move on here to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to be George Haynes, who's an extension economist with Montana State University in the Department of Agricultural Economics, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the small business angle with respect to what's happened and some of the stimulus legislation that's taken place.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot, Joel. So Pat gave you a 30,000-foot view of what's going on. I'm going to be getting into the details. I'm going to talk about the Small Business Administration and what's going on. Tomorrow is going to be a big day for the Small Business Administration because they're going to be asked to oversee the putting at $349 billion in the economy in the form of guaranteed loans. To give you some perspective on this, a year ago they did about $23 billion worth of guaranteed loans. So this is really a substantial change in what's going on with Small Business Administration. Just a quick disclaimer, regarding what we're talking about today. We're going to look at a little modeling of this as we get further into this. We know in general what's going to happen, I think, with the way some things are calculated, but there's some other things that aren't quite so clear at this point in time. So just a disclaimer to say, well, the most important thing, I think, for people that are looking at getting some stimulus aid is be sure and talk to your accountant and other financial advisors as well. So just to take a quick look at the Montana Small Business Profile, this off of some things by the Office of Advocacy here. There are about 120,000 small businesses in Montana. They employ about 245,000 workers. And just to put this in perspective in terms of what's going on, this is really just an employment issue and an unemployment issue because with the week ending on March 21st, there were over nearly 15,000 unemployment claims in Montana. The highest number of claims was during the Great Recession, where there were just a little under 4,000. So really a substantial change in what's going on with employment. And I guess in any communities, we're well aware of that as we see small businesses around us that are just shuttered for the moment. In terms of the employees in Montana, if we look at from an employee perspective, accommodations and food service have really been on the front lines of what's happened, at least over here in western Montana and in a lot of communities as they've asked these people to close. So we have large numbers of people coming out of that arena, retail trade as well. And you can go down the list of, other places where there have been some substantial impacts there. With the combination of food service, 42,500 people involved. If we go down the list over here and small businesses in Montana, there are about 4,600 or so of businesses that are here. So even though a relatively small percentage of the number of businesses, they are a big percentage of the number of employees that are working in the state of Montana and are really impacted, I think, as we look at unemployment by, being at risk of being furloughed or laid off. So what are they attempting to do with this stimulus package that's being proposed or that's out there for the SBA to administer? If we look back to the 2010 recession, this actually started kind of in December of 2007 and actually ended essentially by June of 2009. But as you can see here, it went on it took a while for small businesses to really realize any recovery. And that recovery, depending on what data you're looking at, took somewhere between 2011 or 12 on the more optimistic side, all the way up to 2014 or thereabouts on the more pessimistic side of that. So it took a long time. And what they're hoping with the stimulus package, this line will become a straight line across there, that we will avoid what occurred with the Great Recession. We'll see as we go further what the probability of that is, whether that will likely happen. So the stimulus is part of the Aid and Relief Economic Security Act that was just signed a few days ago. This is a big deal for the Small Business Administration. If we look at what's available for other small businesses in our economy, agricultural businesses have a number of different programs that really help them out in different ways. They have the Farm Service Agency that really handles a lot of their loans, but they handle a lot of their support programs, whether it's the farm programs or whether it's disaster assistance or market facilitation, all of these other programs. When I talk about financial support, this is essentially grants that are just going to the businesses as a result of something that's happened in the economy. They get protection from the Risk Management Agency because they can buy crop insurance, and crop insurance is subsidized by U.S. taxpayers. Then they have Natural Resource and Conservation Service that also provides programming to them. When we look at the small businesses in the U.S., the world is really very different. What they get from the Small Business Administration largely is just loans. And really loan guarantees are the big thing that the Small Business Administration does. They come in different forms, in operating loans and ownership loans, micro loans, and so on, but that's really what they do. This particular program I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, the Paycheck Protection Program, deviates from that because for the first time, at least when we're looking at a disaster, there's a program that's out there that allows small businesses to go out and borrow money and then have the opportunity to have that money forgiven. And so there's a chance that it'll turn from a loan program into really a financial support program, in that they don't have to, excuse me, they don't need to pay any of the principal back. At least they do have some interest interest obligations, but not any principal obligations. So let's take a look at the opportunities that are available through the SBA, and we're going to concentrate only on the first one here, but there's other things going on. Well, in addition to the Paycheck Protection Program, there's also economic injury disaster loans available. They can get loan advances up to $10,000, and they can be available really nearly on the spot. It takes about 3 days to get those. And as per the legislation, those loan advances don't have to be repaid. And there may be some more information coming out on that in the near term. Secondly, they can have a debt relief from the SBA, and the SBA will pay principal and interest on loan guarantees, and that's what these 7A loans are, that are issued prior to September 27th of this year. They'll also pay principal and interest on loans, for a period of 6 months. So another place where the SBA is helping out for people that have, mortgages or other things that are out with them, so they have loans that are in place. And then lastly, there's SBA Express Bridge loans. This is really for people that have applied for the economic injury disaster loans that I talked about above, but they can get an express loan for $25,000 to bridge the business between right now and then when the economic injury disaster loan money, or at least the full amount of that money, would be available to them. So that's kind of what's sitting out there for the SBA at this juncture. Okay, one of these is the most important, and it's really critical because tomorrow is the big day. If you're going to sign up for the Paycheck Protection Program, it begins on April 3rd and it extends through the end of June. So how does this work? Well, eligible recipients are those people that are able to qualify for a loan, can get a loan guarantee, and from anywhere from $1 to $10 million. These loan payments are going to be deferred for 6 months. So if you get a loan, you're not going to owe anything on it for 6 months. If you maintain your workforce, and this becomes the really critical part of this, if you maintain your workforce, then you have a chance of having this entire loan forgiven. You have to maintain your workforce over an 8-week period from the time you get the loan for 8 weeks hence. And if you do all of that, as we'll see in a few minutes, then you have this opportunity to have the loan principal forgiven. The loan proceeds can be used to pay for expenses. In February 15th doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. You can do a look back to February 15th and pay for any expenses through the end of June. There's no collateral or personal guarantees are required. There's no government or lender charges to small businesses, no fees on any of these loans. And the loan has a maturity, and this has been going through a lot of discussion, even as I was talking today with some people at SBA, but it looks like the maturity is going to be 2 years. The interest rate on the loan will be 0.5%. So in order to qualify for one of these, you have to have less than 500 employees, which is not an issue for us, largely here in Montana. There is a provision that's out there for small businesses in the hospitality and food industry with more than one location. And in those cases, as long as the store in that particular location has less than 500 people, then they're going to be in a position to compete for some of this money. Most importantly, the business must have been in operation by February 15th. So this doesn't handle businesses that have, gone into business here more recently just to take advantage of the programs. So if these the loan funds are available and they, as I said before, they can be forgiven, but they can only use these loan funds for certain things. And one of them is they can pay for payroll. And with the money that's being allocated, about 75% or at least 75% of it's going to need to be used for payroll. If it turns out to be more than that, you're likely not to be able to get all of it forgiven. But 75% needs to go for payroll. Then if you have some left over, you can then pay interest on a mortgage or rent or pay for some utilities. But this is all dependent upon maintaining people working for you and also maintaining salary levels. So this is really an opportunity to keep people employed, and so that's really the emphasis of the payroll protection program. So how do we do this? And we'll go through a little example here that'll probably make this somewhat clearer. But we first have to go off and compute earnings, and this is essentially done by going out and looking to see what your earnings were over the past year, and then adding to that your benefits that you may have been paid, which would be health insurance premiums and any retirement contributions and so on. So we have two components. One of them your kind of salaries and wages, and the other part of it being the benefits. So how do we compute these things? Well, there's still a discussion going on. I think we'll know a little bit more maybe in the next few hours. But initially, the example that we're going to go through today, it looks like this is going to be paid. This would be doing a look back for 12 months, but that may be shortened to only from February 15th to June of 2019. If you haven't been in business in February through June of 2019, then there's an opportunity for you to do payroll computations from January 1st of this year through the end of February. And then seasonal businesses have a whole different array of choices that are out there, but primarily to try to help them find a reasonable time when they had employees working for them, and then that will become the basis for their average payroll expenses. So the way this works is that they have a maximum loan based on 2.5 times their average monthly payroll. And then there's a few things that need to be subtracted that aren't included in that. If you have any payroll that's over, $33,000 for essentially just over this period, then that doesn't qualify. If there's any money you received for sick leave that's already been paid for by another program, that doesn't work out, or family leave that's been picked up by another program, those things don't work. Those are not included either as payroll costs or benefits in this particular case. So let's go through a quick example of this. I'm going to run over my time just a bit, but if you let's say that this business has $150,000 in salaries and $50,000 in benefits for $200,000 in total. If we divide that $200,000, it turns out that we have about $16,667 that's then our average payroll. We get 2.5 times of that as the amount of the loan that we can go out and apply for. So we have the ability to borrow, in this case, almost $42,000. So what do we do with this $42,000? Well, we can spend it on payroll. And in this particular example above, with people earning about this amount of money, and assuming there's only 4 guys working for this business, $33,000 of that would be already eaten up in payroll expenses. For payroll, for their salary, and for their benefits. That would be 80% of the loan. And the banks are going to like that because that's going to allow you to satisfy their requirements that at least 75% of it be for payroll. The remaining funds, that's $8,000, you can spend on some other things, but really only interest, rents, and utilities. There may be some things added to this, but I'm not so sure that the list is going to get much longer. That seems to be about it. So let's say that you decide to lay off one of your workers over this 8-week period. And so your workforce goes from 3 workers down to 4. Well, you end up getting penalized. And the way the penalty works is essentially you take 1 minus your number of workers that you currently have working for you divided by the number that you had working for you the prior 12 months. So in this particular case, you get 1 less, 0.75 or 3/4. And so you end up with a 25% penalty because your number of employees has been reduced. Turns out that you're going to then lose 25% of the loan amount, so you're going to be penalized, just a little over $10,000. And so the total amount of forgiveness that you're going to get on this loan will only be about $31,000. If you would have kept everybody employed over that entire 8-week period, then you would have been able to get forgiveness on the entire amount of the loan, the $41,667. I'm not going to go into this in much detail here, but one of the decisions that's really important to a lot of businesses is they're better off to have people on unemployment, or they're better off just to stay on the job that they currently have. In this particular example, if you have an employee that's making about $37,500, he's going to get about 1% of that per week for unemployment, so he's going to get $375 a week. Would end up getting about $1,500 a month on unemployment insurance. Federal government's going to kick in $600 a week, so you're going to get $2,400 on top of that. So your gross unemployment compensation from federal and state would be about $3,900. In our little example that we've been doing here with this employee that was um, in our business was earning $37,500 in the business, is going to have an average salary of about a little over $3,100. Monthly benefits probably going to be around $1,000. So he's going to end up with gross salary and benefits of about $4,000. So these numbers are pretty close to one another. But keep in mind, when you're on unemployment compensation, you got to go out and find other health insurance and other retirement and so on as well. So these are this situation with unemployment really will require a lecture of its own as we move forward in this series of webinars. So how do you get the money? Well, you might, it would be best if you found an SBA certified or preferred lender. They do have a program also to add additional lenders in, but that's going to take some time. I talked to SBA in Washington this morning. They weren't exactly sure the details of this. So if you can find an SBA certified lender out there, I would encourage you to do that. The Montana lenders that are the SBA lenders are at this website right here. This is the most important slide that I probably have in this set. If you need to go to this resource guide, and if you look on pages 28 to 33, you will find a place that lists all of the SBA certified lenders that are in the state of Montana. The banks will begin working on this tomorrow, so if you want money out of this, I think it's really important to get in and talk to a lender as soon as you can. If you're self-employed, or you're a single employee, or you're an independent contractor, you're going to have to wait till April 10th. I think it's important to apply as early as you can because this $349 billion will go away pretty quickly. There's a simple form you have to fill out that that they'll give you. It's only a 3-page application, so really not really terribly onerous. When you get the money, as I've already talked about before, remember that you really can spend this on payroll-related issues or interest or rent or utilities, and that's about it. So this really becomes critical as you think about how you're going to use the money. There are other opportunities that are out there, and we're not going to go into these in any detail, but the most important piece of the puzzle here is you do have this opportunity for going out and participating in this payroll protection program. Again, it begins tomorrow. For many small businesses will be able to go out and begin to put an application in for this particular program. So with that, that's what I know about this particular program at this juncture, and would be happy to take any questions.
All right, we did have one couple comments came in earlier as will we be recording these? We are. The website that I sent out in the chat box is where we will post those. We had a question of will the SBA link be shared? Yeah, if you want to send me an email directly, I can certainly get that link to you. Maybe George can put it back up on the screen there for a minute as well. Let's see here.
Yeah, this link is pretty important because there's a link that's on the SBA.gov website, but the link I think is not working properly. So if you want to find out who the SBA certified lenders are here, this will help you.
All right, we have a question here, George, about quickly rehiring. Does that mean that those employees that have been released due to COVID-19 and then rehired and put back on the payroll, or is this once the business reopens?
No, you can, if once you've signed a loan guarantee with the bank, then at that point in time, you'd want to rehire those people. So it would be from the point in time that the loan has been, that you've actually signed on the dotted line for the loan, then at that point in time, you can rehire. And then you need to keep those people employed over the 8 weeks to get your full forgiveness of the loan.
All right, one more question. Do you get the application for the PPP loan from the bank or from SBA?
I would encourage you to go to the bank. There is a link that's out on the SBA website. If you go under the PPP web page, there is a link for doing it on the web, but I think you're going to have the participation of a bank. So I would contact a local SBA lender and initiate that way. That'll be far and away the quickest way to get it done.
All right, well, thank you very much, George. We'll go ahead and move on now here in our talk, and I'm actually going to be your last presenter. I wanted to talk a little bit about how the individuals in the stimulus fit in. And then at the end, I also want to let people know we're going to ask folks what topics you might be interested in for future sessions, because we do have some open slots. So be thinking about that in the back of your mind with that as well. So I'm going to talk, very narrowly here just about some of the pieces that can affect an individual directly. So first of all, kind of how has this hit everybody? Well, certainly we've seen this loss of employment, directly due to the illness, but more likely due to businesses closing as a result of the restrictions sort of to help it prevent spreading or slow that spreading as well. And it might not be that you've lost your income, but you've just had reduced hours or reduced tips and those kind of things. And like Pat mentioned originally, a big question is how long is this going to take? Is this going to be a 3-week shock, a 6-week shock, a 6-month shock? So I want to take a look here at kind of how the stimulus is going to act into this on individuals directly. So they've made a couple different changes, some of them on sort of an agency level, some in terms of legislation. One being they pushed that normal income tax filing deadline for the 2019 back from April 15th to July 15th. It's an automatic extension. Now that may not seem like too big of a thing. Many people actually get refunds, so they actually file early to get those checks. But oftentimes the folks who wait till the last 2 weeks to file are the ones that are going to have to pay money to the IRS. So it's a little bit like a free loan for them to go from April to July in terms of delaying that. Estimated tax payments for first quarter of 2020 are also delayed as well. So again, it's a little bit like a free loan for these folks that want to push that back a little bit in terms of their filing deadline. I guess I took that slide out. States also have to, typically you file those together. Montana has opted to delay till July 15th as well, but that's not necessarily true everywhere, so you do need to check with your local state to see what they've done. Idaho actually picked June 15th, so they did not choose to match up with the federal bump back. So they pushed theirs back, but not all the way to July. One of the earlier sort of stimulus type acts that came out was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This was almost 2 weeks old now, March 18th is when it passed. However, it was effective yesterday, and this is somewhat important for some of the aspects because it could have helped individuals that maybe had this situation between March 19th, say, or March 18th and April 30th as well, and March 31st as well. But it's only going to be applicable to those folks after April 1st. So first of all, it didn't apply to all employers. It did apply to federal, state, and local public agencies. So this is, again, directly federal employees, state employees, university service or university system where I work was affected, but also your counties and cities as well were covered by this. And then employers with less than 500 workers, which a lot of private employers in Montana would qualify. There are some exemptions for employers with less than 50 workers, so it is important to check with your actual employer if you think these programs might be beneficial to you. So the first thing the FCCR Act did is it created 2 different types of brand new kind of paid leave. The first being emergency paid sick leave, and all employees that were employed, regardless of how long they've worked there, are eligible for this piece. And essentially this is if the employee is actually subject to a quarantine or isolation order, or if you've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. They've got a definition out there of what a healthcare provider is. It's pretty broad. If the employee is experiencing symptoms of CV-19 and seeking treatment, those all qualify. The second group here, 4 through 6, is kind of if you're helping somebody in the family. So an employee's caring for an individual that's been advised to self-quarantine, or if your child or you're caring for your child because their school or daycare has closed, which I can certainly appreciate that, as I have one doing a little bit of homeschool work here in the next room to me. Or if the employee is experiencing other similar conditions specified by the Health and Human Secretary of Health and Human Services. So they made it very broad. We don't know what the definition of that number 6 is going to look like, but I think the intent was that they would make it as broad as possible. So employees that are at these eligible employers, their full-time employees are eligible for up to 80 hours of this type of emergency paid sick leave. If you're a Part-time employee, it's prorated based on your average hours. So if you're a half-time worker, you'd have 40 hours of this type of sick leave. Can't carry it forward into other years. And the employers have to pay this in addition to other benefits. So they can't say, well, you already have sick leave and we're just going to call the first 2 weeks of your sick leave this EPSL leave. So, and they also have to, they can't require you to take your other leave first. This has to be additional leave. And if you're using it for reasons 1 through 3, that's kind of if the employee themselves is dealing with this, they can get their full compensation up to a maximum of $511 a day. Now, if you're doing it for helping a family member, essentially, that was the 4 through 6 reasons, you can get 2/3 of your compensation up to a maximum of $200 per day. So they do differentiate why you're taking that leave in terms of how much you can get paid. The second type of leave that this act created is emergency family medical leave. The first 10 days are unpaid in this case, and I think this was designed to work in concert with the previous leave that we just talked about. So this would kick in after that would take place. Other leave can be used for that first 10 days, so your vacation time, your sick leave, or the previous emergency leave that we just talked about. After that 10 days, then employers must pay at least 2/3 of your regular pay up to $200 per day, maximum of $10,000 over the life of the program, which is 12 weeks for this. So employers with less than 50 employees may be exempted from this, and the reason they have to give is that it jeopardizes the viability of the business as a going concern. We don't know exactly what that definition will look like there as well. The employee must be employed for 30 days to qualify for this. So for the first 10-day leave, that was for anyone who's employed. The Emergency Family Medical Leave Act here is just for those that have been with the company at least 30 days in length. Now, probably the biggest news item thing we've seen are these cash rebates directly back to individuals. And rebates is the term that they use. It's essentially $1,200 per qualified taxpayer. So what's qualified taxpayer? Well, it's anyone age 18 and over. You have to have a work-eligible Social Security number. So that doesn't mean you have to actually be working. So our retirees will be eligible for this. You also can't be claimed as a dependent on someone else's return. And kind of the big area there that we're going to see is maybe college students. So those 18, 19, 20-year-olds that might still be claimed on their parents' return won't be able to get their own $1,200 rebate to themselves. And we'll talk here in a minute. Children also get $500, or the parents of them do, but only if that child is under age 17. So there's going to actually be this gap of these very young adults that aren't going to get a $500 rebate to their parents, nor are they going to get their own $1,200 rebate. There's going to be a little bit of a gap. They also put a maximum income or an income phase-out period. So for an individual, you're going to get the full refund if you have adjusted gross income of $75,000 or less. If you're married, filing jointly, they double that to $150,000. Then for any $5 above, or every $100 above that phase out, they're going to take $5 away, or 5%. So what that works out to, if you're an individual, if you make $100,000, you're not going to get a rebate at all. You'll get zero. And I'll show you a couple examples here. Now, what income are they going to take? Obviously, not everyone has filed their 2019 return, which would have been due here in about 2 weeks if they hadn't extended it. So they're going to go ahead and look back at the most recent income you filed, which might be last year's tax return, or it might be the one that you filed somewhere between January 1st and now. However, that's only an estimate of the income. The actual income they care about is your 2020 income, which we won't even report that to the IRS until spring of 2021. Now, that could be important for some folks that are at the higher end of this income. So let's say you did make, you're a single individual, you made $110,000 in 2019. Maybe you're a real estate agent and your commissions really dropped off and you only make $40,000 in 2020. So you're actually going to be eligible for that rebate based on your 2020 income. But for those folks that are in that situation, you're actually not going to get your rebate now. When you file your 2020 taxes, you'll get it basically a year from now when they determine that, hey, we originally thought you weren't eligible, but based on your 2020 income, you are eligible. So you'd get it much later than everyone else. So what that looks like in terms of a couple examples here, if we got a married couple with 2 children, age 5 and 8, and total income, adjusted gross income of $95,000, that is less than the $150,000 limit for married couples, they're going to get $3,400 sent directly to them. So $1,200 for each adult and $500 for each child. A single filer with 1 child, age 15, income of $39,000, they're going to get $1,700 as their rebate example. Now, let's say that single filer had a 19-year-old child, same income, they're only going to get $1,200 because that child is too old to collect that $500 payment as well. So the age of that child does matter, even if they're still being claimed as a dependent on the parent's tax return. Couple more examples. So if we have a single filer with no children, but they have an income of $80,000, and we'll just assume that it stays the same in 2020, that rebate would have been $1,200. However, they made $5,000 over where we get into that phase-out calculation. So we take 5% of that amount, works out to $250, and we subtract that. So this person would actually get a $950 refund or rebate is what they're going to get back to them. Now, let's say we got a single filer with no children, income $105,000. Again, their original rebate would have been $1,200, but they've made $30,000 over that limit. So their phase-out calculation is going to be $1,500. We got to subtract that. It's more than what the rebate would be, so they're not actually going to get a rebate at all. Now, if we had just kind of changed the story and said this single filer had 2 children, now that adds another $1,000 to their original rebate that we'd subtract the $500 off of, and they would get one there. So it depends on your family size and the age of those children in terms of what that kind of maximum income level is, where you'll still get a rebate. So when are you going to get your rebate? Well, the Treasury Secretary was instructed to send them as rapidly as possible. Estimates are about 3 weeks for direct deposits. Now, whether that's 3 weeks from last week when it was passed, or whether that's 3 weeks from today, I don't know, but it should be coming probably by the end of April. For those folks that don't use direct deposit, it's probably going to be more like 6 or 8 weeks if you end up getting a paper check. Now, if you've been getting your tax refund via direct deposit, the IRS has that information. They've been given access to that, and that's going to be their first option to send you that money. Also, for folks that are receiving Social Security benefits, they've been given access to access the data that the Social Security beneficiaries have been receiving and utilize their bank account as well. So those folks are going to automatically be in that. There was some talk that there would be a way to provide a bank account number if you've been getting it by paper. But as of yesterday, it said under construction for that link, so it hasn't been made available yet. Or they will mail it to the most recent address on your tax return. There is also a possibility if you haven't filed your taxes. Originally they said that maybe you don't make enough income that you're required to file, that you would need to file a simplified return in order to receive this. They've now kind of stepped back on that. But if you haven't filed in a number of years and you're not in the Social Security system, it might be a good idea to check with an accountant and see if you need to file a normal tax return, even owing nothing, just to make sure you get into that system. So guidance was still coming out from the IRS on that yesterday afternoon. They've also made some retirement-related changes. First of all, they waived the 10% early withdrawal penalty for those under age 59 and a half if you're taking money out of a IRA, 401k, 403b plan. For those qualified plans, the 401k or 403b, you do have to not be employed to be eligible to make a withdrawal at all. But normally those would be subject to regular income tax and a 10% penalty. If you're under 59 and a half, they have waived that 10% penalty. Also, you normally have to withhold some taxes out of those, just like your normal paycheck, so that when you get to the end of the year, your tax bill isn't quite so high. They've waived that requirement as well through the end of the calendar year. They also are letting you pay it back later. So if you take some money out because you think you need it, but then maybe down the road you decide you didn't necessarily need it, there are some options where you can pay that money back into those retirement accounts. So giving you a little bit of flexibility in terms of those retirement funds. Now, required minimum distributions are waived for 2020. So this is for folks age 70 and a half, where they're required to start taking some of their money out. You might think, this is kind of counterintuitive. The other ones, we've been giving people access to their money. Now we're saying you don't have to take your money. But what they're kind of saying here is obviously the stock market has gone down substantially. If you're to actually pull money out of those and sell to make your required minimum distribution today, you may not get some of that increase back into that account. So you'd be kind of locking in a loss if you were forced to take that retirement distribution today. So they're giving those that maybe don't need the money the opportunity to leave it there for an extra year before they start pulling that money out. They've also, for folks that have an employer-sponsored retirement plan, again, these are typically those 401k or 403b plans that allow participant loans. Typically in the past, you could have borrowed, if the plan allowed it, up to 50% of your vested account balance to a maximum of $50,000. They've now said you can borrow 100% of your vested balance up to $100,000. And if you currently have a loan outstanding, you can delay payments on it for up to 1 year. Now, not all plans allow loans in general, so plans that don't allow them are still not going to allow them as well. But it's an opportunity for that employer-sponsored plan to provide a little more flexibility to their participants if they choose to. Now, George mentioned it a little bit earlier. I just want to put this graphic up because it really caught my attention. This is from the Tax Foundation. So let me grab my arrow here. This bar over here, the purple, this is Montana's average unemployment claims per week during the 2-year period that was the recession about 10 years ago. This 3,800 number of Montanans here, this was the highest single week we had of new claimants in Montana during the Great Recession. This was the number they released a week ago, and this was the number of new unemployment claims they released this week. At the end of February, kind of before all this hit Montana, we only had 22,400 people unemployed, and that was a non-seasonally adjusted number. I don't know what the first 2 weeks of March looked like. I wasn't able to pull those data here this morning, but just in the last 2 weeks, we've had almost 35,000 Montanans file compared to a total of 22,000 that were unemployed the month previous. So incredible shock to our labor market here in the last month. There have been some changes. George mentioned them. I'm just going to mention them very briefly here. The new federal law did provide some flexibility to states. Typically, there's a 1-week waiting period before unemployment benefits start. States have been encouraged to waive that. They're also adding an additional $600 per week of employment compensation on top of what you were getting to the state prior to. Now, given that the average unemployment benefit is something like $400 a week, a $600 boost is a pretty sizable increase. They also added 13 additional weeks that can be claimed as well. So instead of the typical 26, there's an additional 13 that one could claim beyond that. They've also changed the rules, so they're calling it a short-time compensation period. So this is somebody that's had their hours reduced that they might be able to also claim as well. So maybe they haven't lost their job, but they went from 40 hours a week to 8 or something like that. There's a program they might be eligible for as well. They also changed the definition a little bit to allow some self-employed individuals to claim as well. So Montana Department of Labor, who handles that, I've got their website there. You can see exactly each state was able to implement this a little bit differently. So there's not kind of a blanket statement for all states, but they did incentivize the states to expand these benefits quite a lot. So with that, are there some additional questions for myself or George as well? I know Pat had to leave to join another event, so he's not able to take questions. I'll also put a poll on here while I'm answering questions about some ideas for topics that you might have for us in the future. So we had a question here about if you had a child born in 2019 and have not yet filed your 2019, I'm guessing you won't get paid for that child. Well, the short answer is you won't get paid right now for that child if you haven't filed your return. However, when you do file your return for 2019, that will show up as an eligible child, and it does look like you will get an additional amount. However, they have not given a hard and fast date yet in terms of what cutoff period it is. They're going to take a look at which returns have been filed. So it's possible if you were to file today, that the IRS might actually be able to capture that data and get that additional amount included in your current check that would come out in 3 weeks. So there was quite a bit of discussion about what that cutoff date would be, and I didn't see a clear answer in some of the discussions in terms of when the Treasury will take a look at those IRS records. So, great question. And just a preview here while folks are telling us some topics here. We do have agriculture on tap for next week. We have tourism on tap for next week, and I believe we have healthcare on tap as well. And then 2 weeks and 3 weeks from now, we have not set our agenda. So this is where we're looking for a few ideas in terms of some aspects of the economy that we might be able to dig a little deeper into, or some topics that we're going to cover. All right. Well, not seeing any additional questions. Thank you all for taking an hour here and spending it with us. We appreciate your participation. Mark your calendars for 1 week from today. The same login link will be available, and the website recording will be posted at that link I shared in the chat box as well. So, have a great day, everyone.